Hello, hello. Welcome in, paulkawarski.com. Titans during the second week of training camp. We're moving right along. Two practices and pads. I don't know what they did today. Might have been off, might have just been closed to media, but we're back out there tomorrow morning. We'll talk to all the position coaches, and they'll be back at it 9:15, 9:30. A lot of reports will come out. Come on in. Good to see you jumping. Did you get the text? Did you get the text? I hope so. Hi, Ethan, Ivan, Focus One, Adam, Joshua. A lot of familiar names and faces. Good to see you. Sam Dean, Alejandro. All right, we got some text. Everybody's hearing me fine. I take it. Good to see you. Good start to camp for this team. I mean, you don't want to read too much into things too soon, but they've been relatively healthy. Elijah Molden is the main guy missing. And are you signed up for text? The person who said they did not get the text, because everybody else is saying they got it. James is here, Brian Moore is here, and everybody's saying they got it. So Facebook user from Facebook side who says he or she didn't get it. I wonder if you're signed up, and if you go to the post announcing this chat, just above the Facebook broadcast, below the line, there's a way to sign up to get the texts. So make sure you're signed up for that, and you'll get it. Hey Scott, hey Robert, DB, good to see all of you. Broadway Sports Media in here. One of the better starts to camp in recent memory. The start to camp, it's hard to say. Look, the biggest thing about the start to camp is that nobody's been hurt. Nobody's missing significant time outside of Molden. In that regard, it's a very good start to camp. In the regard where guys that you want to see out there getting a good start, as I spill my water all over the place, are out there and getting a good start. Burks in particular, McCreary in particular, the rookies. Yes, we haven't heard anything bad about Radens yet, so that's a good development. Though it's only 2 days in pads for him, so you need more. Brewer I think has made a good impression. So the guys you need to see things from so far, I think we're seeing things from. That's good news. Let's get rolling on the questions, and I'll interject as things come to mind. Thank you no, Mike's not in here. And if Mike was coming in here, I certainly wouldn't have him in here as BSM now that he's PK.com. Glad most people seem to really be excited about the addition of him. And I'm excited to be able to add him. Certainly a lot different than me and different than Blake. So, once a week we'll have something entirely different. Will Craig asks, how long do we have to wait to know if a rookie success is a flash in the pan, or actually a quality player? Well, I think for the higher ranking guys, I think we know Roger McCreary is a legitimately skilled guy who has the qualities that they thought he had. Excuse me, when they drafted him. And, he's gone against some legitimately good receivers in the SEC. So, you want to see him in games. He'll play in the preseason, and then you want to see him translated into NFL games, but doubt the setting is too big for him. And so, I think he can legitimately be encouraged about the start and think it means something and expect more. If you're talking about, let's see, let's go on the defensive line. If you're talking about who, come on. The kid from Houston, the second year defensive lineman, DeMarcus Walker. I think it's meaningful that he's off to a good start. He's working with Jeffrey Simmons. He's getting great reviews. There's not a lot of competition at the back of the defensive line spot. And by the back of the defensive line spot, I mean after Jeffrey Simmons and after Danico Autry, who's oftentimes treated like an outside linebacker. That's the position group he works with. And he's not going to be Teair Tart or Naquan Jones. He's not going to play nose. But he's going to need to still outplay this bunch of rookie, undrafted rookies and ones to lock in. I think he's, been quite good and looks like a guy's going to make the roster. Some undrafted rookie who's been good so far. You can't read too much into it yet. I think you need to see him play in a couple preseason games and show for that to have a lot of meaning. So different scale based on expectations and status coming in, I would say. Ed Henry, do the Titans have a dedicated group that monitors what the press reports on at practice? And what's the ramification if rules are broken? Well, yeah, the PR staff, controls us during practice, make sure we are where we're supposed to be, gets an earful from Vrabel if Vrabel sees us shooting something that we're not supposed to be shooting or too close to the field or something like that. And somebody the other day, let's say there was an interesting formation that Burks came out of that got him in a matchup against Zach Cunningham. So, and he torched Cunningham. So me saying Burks comes out of an interesting formation to get in a one-on-one with Cunningham, in a complete mismatch that he dominates, that's permissible. If you said what the interesting formation is, which I think somebody did, unwittingly, so to speak, it's a slip that we've all probably made, but very taboo. PR director pretty quickly, either somebody pointed out to him or he heard from another reporter or he saw for himself, quickly texted that reporter, hey, what the hell are you doing? Take that down. And it got taken down. But they're aware, 4 of them in main PR, not corporate PR, of what we're saying and doing. And if you break a rule, there's a discussion had. If you consistently break a rule, there are more discussions had. And, you get on Vrabel's blacklist, if you will, and you can count on not being helped. So Paul says, haven't heard much about Rashad Weaver. I mean, he's looked good. You haven't heard too much about secondary or tertiary options at spots where it's important to wear pads. Vrabel had nice things to say about Weaver's progress on special teams where he needs to be an impact guy. I think he's probably pretty safely on the roster. I don't know who's challenging him there, right? You've got, already said that Autry kind of counts as an outside linebacker. There was roster spots, defensive line. So then you've got Landry and Bud Dupree. And after that, not a lot. So that's where, Weaver and Ola Adeni, I think are relatively safe as depth there because they don't have much else. So here's Ivan asking, is it safe to say J-Rob either panicked or misplayed his hand with Brown given the other wide receiver contracts signed this offseason? Well, I think the total that Brown was looking for was a little high. And look, here's the thing. If you look at what Debo got, McLaurin got, and Metcalf got, 3 teams, San Francisco, rookie quarterback, Garoppolo, $25 million and on his way out. Seattle, no-cost quarterbacks. Wentz with the Commanders, not making anything close to what Tannehill's making. So it's easy for those 3 teams to pay big dollars for a wide receiver when they've got low-price quarterback options. So you're balancing those scales of price. That's one thing that worked against AJ here. Also, AJ was the biggest asshole of all 4 of those guys. He was the squeakiest wheel. He was going to make it very difficult on the Titans if they didn't agree to a deal right then, he was not going to be at OTAs. He was going to come to the mini camp and not practice the way Jeff did, but not in a conciliatory way. And he was going to show up to camp if he didn't have his deal done and do the hold in a noisy way. He was the angriest of everybody. And I think he was the least mature of everybody, if you look at it, with his Twitter behavior. So I think the Titans were in the most difficult situation. Now, there are teams who are paying both a quarterback and a receiver. But we also saw, an Aaron Rodgers led team and a Patrick Mahomes led team, obviously both significantly better than Tannehill, go a different direction with, getting rid of big time receivers also in Hill and Davante Adams. So, I've talked about it. I don't know which direction this is heading, but there's so many good receivers coming out of college. Maybe Burks proves to be one of those, and wide receiver becomes a position that's replaceable the way running back has become. I don't know where it's headed, but we will find out. I think AJ made it a lot harder than it had to be. I think Robinson misplays it because it's hard to give up that kind of playmaker without having a guarantee playmaker coming in, and they don't have a guaranteed playmaker coming in. So they're praying about Burks. Give me 1 second here. I need to send a text. All right. Shovik. What are my early impressions of Woods compared to Julio last year? Well, Woods is going to be available, barring a setback with that knee. That's my early impression. Woods is out there working every day. Julio got hurt in the 4th training camp practice, I believe. He looks great. I thought things might change for him a little bit this week because twisting, torquing, people leaning on that knee creates something different than he experienced last week in 4 ramp-up practices. So far, so good. Julio at his best was running away from people. We didn't see Julio at anything near his best, and he's an old man. Robert Woods is not an old man. He's getting older. Second half of your question is about NWI, and there's some NWI questions in here. Look, I think the Titans think he's a top 3 guy. Now, does he line up as a top 3 guy? I think he could line up in the slot some. I think Kyle Phillips, if things keep going on the track they are, would be the slot guy, not irreplaceable, but the ideal slot guy. NWI, to me, though, would rotate, in as the sub. So if Woods goes 4, 5, 6 reps in a row where he's running decent depth routes, NWI is going to come in and take a couple for him, for Burks, for Phillips, for whoever, and he's going to wind up, with a decent amount of snaps, I think. And he's a good player. I like him as a 4. I mean, he's worked himself from nothing into something. He's a good special teamer. He's a great character guy. I don't want him any higher than 4, though, right? If Burks gets hurt, if Woods has a setback, if Phillips doesn't pan out, then you're teetering on NWI being too high. And if he's too high, that's trouble. And, if you go any deeper than 4, you're in real trouble. Des Fitzpatrick's terrible, very pedestrian. If you look at the highlights I sent out, sometimes it looks like there's no effort. There's the one where they go up the cones, cut at the cones, and make a catch. Everybody's tight to the cones and making very crisp cuts at the cones. Josh Malone, not so much. He rounds it a little bit. But Des isn't even near the cones. He starts off wide of the cones. He makes a cut and he's wide of the cones. He makes a cut and he's wide of the cones. It doesn't look like he's fierce or determined to be near those cones the way everybody else is. You look at Phillips, a guy who's been around for 2 months, and I mean, he's like glue on those cones. He's as close to that cone as you could humanly be. Woods, same. Burks trying like hell. And Fitz doesn't seem to matter to Fitz. Yeah, this comes from me. This is a Facebook user. Keep hearing about Phillips looking good in one-on-ones, but hasn't translated into groups periods. That's not true. He's looked really good in 7-on-7. I sent out a clip that I think was, I don't know if it was one-on-one or 7-on-7. 100,000 views of this, where he just left at former Vols cornerback in Kenneth George, just got shot past by 1,000,000 yards. He needs to be doing more against better guys, and now he's Tannehill pretty much indicated that he'd start working with the ones, and he started to get a little bit of time with the ones. So that's good for Phillips, and you want to see that. He needs to be working ahead of Mason Kinsey. Mason Kinsey reward time for good off-season work is over now, to me. And now you get into who deserves it and who needs it. And Phillips is one of those guys. So I would expect to see more and more of him. Robert McGee is asking about Byard. It's not a new level of fitness. It's just kind of I don't know. He's kind of graduated to a different approach or veteran knowledge, that kind of thing. He's always been a great leader. Racey McMath torched Caleb Farley for 2 long passes in a move the ball period the other day, and Byard talked to him about it. Said, we're running multiple snaps here, more than 3 or 4 in a row. Maybe 6 or 7 or 8 in a row, and you got to be ready for it. And I was saying good things about you at the podium, but I got to be honest with you here, and we need you for that kind of stuff. That's natural leadership of a seventh year guy who's senior most now on defense, right? I think Byard is what you'd expect Byard to be now. Landry may have had good rapport with him, Adam and Chovik, but he said bad things about him after. My guess on Jeffrey Simmons is that he gets a deal. It could be during this training camp, but I would think it's next offseason. I mean, Chig might be outside some, but they're not, I'm not noticing it a lot. I couldn't reveal a lot about it, but he's not lining up like a wide receiver. They line up their wide receivers like wide receivers, and they line up their tight ends like tight ends. Racey's consistently better at being faster than everybody else. But, I mean, I wouldn't go crazy with Racey having had that one great series with 3 catches and 2 of them deep. He's 5th. And there's space between 4 and 5. He's a hard worker. I don't think Will breaking down the team is a big deal. Tannehill's a leader. These guys follow Tannehill. Tannehill knows the offense in and out. He's directing people where to go, how he needs things to be, and all of that. Now, is he the guy you want, on a horse leading your team into the stadium for a playoff game? No, not until he is a guy responsible for them. First not losing a playoff game and then winning a playoff game. This could very easily be Brett Kern's last year, I think. Stonehouse has a big leg. It's early still. They don't kick a great deal. But we'll see. Kern was punting some the other day. He was angling to the sideline, and the first couple were poor. They went out of bounds too early. But then I don't think Stonehouse got a chance to match or surpass. 3-quarterback thing is tough for me, Tyler, because in game, I'd be fine with Willis replacing Tannehill, because in game, if they go to a second quarterback, if Tannehill gets hurt, They're going to throw super short. They're going to hand it off a bunch to Henry. That should be first. They're going to hand it off a bunch. They're going to throw super short. And then Willis would be able to do running, obviously, that Woodside would not be able to do. So he's more dangerous in that element. And they're both going to suck in terms of throwing the ball. Preparation week with a week to prepare and a defense to get ready for you. Look, I think they're both going to suck. I think Willis is more threatening with the run. Woodside's more threatening in terms of getting the ball to spots. He's going to be at the beginning of the season. It's going to be a very limited game plan. But is it worth keeping Woodside for it? I think they will think yes, which means, Willis inactive sometimes. But then if you want to bring him in a special package to let him run, you got to have 3 active. So I don't know. It's a tough call to me. But he is swimming right now, and there's a lot of stuff that's over his head. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's what I would expect for a guy of his status at this stage. Maybe things slow down for him a little bit, but I think it would take some time. And I think it takes some time for a guy who was, being thrown to the wolves, a month or 6 weeks into the season, and he's not going to be. So it will take even more time. So I prefer to think of him as a 2023 option. And maybe they force themselves to resist temptation. Will says maybe the best case scenario is Willis gets COVID right around cut day. I don't think you can get away with faking COVID. And I don't think COVID doesn't land you on any list anymore. COVID gets you sent home for 5 days or something more, but it doesn't, there's no roster safety in having COVID. Robert, you're right here. It's going to be one of those old school Titans teams who are trying to win by playing great defense and controlling the clock on the ground. And the league is changing, and the Titans are perfectly willing to try to win by being an anomaly, generally speaking. Look, 2 years ago, they went to the playoffs as a division winner. And they were second in points and fourth in total offense. But that was with 2,000 of the yards coming with Derrick Henry. But they're a pretty explosive offense. They've regressed from that for sure. Last year, they were not that. So I'm going to scroll back here and see what I've missed. All right, here's Michael asking how bad Caleb Farley has been. Look, that was one bad period against Racey McMath. Caleb Farley's been pretty good, especially coming off the knee. So I wouldn't get overly concerned about that. He got tired. So I think his conditioning needs to get better. And I don't think that is completely, you can't say, oh my God, how is the guy not in shape for 8 consecutive plays? It's a different kind of thing. 8 consecutive plays in pads for a guy that spent most of the offseason getting over the ACL as opposed to doing football conditioning stuff. So I wouldn't panic about Caleb Farley. He's been better than I would have expected to this stage. Are the receivers better than we thought? The top receivers have been better than expected to this point, but that's to this point. But the bottom receivers have been just as bad as we thought to this point. Racey had that one good period. Fitzpatrick's terrible. I don't even know who we're discussing after that. The kid from Texas, it's going to take me a minute here. Reggie Roberson has some moments. He's 5'11", 193. He's faster than the UT kid, and I think a little bit more crisp. So, there's some potential there. To me, a guy like that should be ultimately replacing somebody like Cody Hollister on the practice squad. We know Cody Hollister's ceiling. It's time to get somebody with a higher ceiling, and maybe he's that. Josh Malone makes plays when the ball comes to him. That's slowed down a little bit. And I feel like he rounds his routes a lot in drills, which suggests to me he's not technically as good as he needs to be, which they ultimately won't like as much as we may like him making plays. And again, I think that's tapered off some. Ethan Jordan asks about the linebackers. Very little said about them. Outside rush backers, again, 2 days in pads. You're not going to hear much. Landry and Dupree are going to be just fine. I have a lot of confidence in those guys. Inside guys, look, Long is the coverage guy, and Cunningham is the thumper. I don't think that. And Long can go both ways. Long can rush the passer, and Long's going to make tackles in the run game. Long's well-rounded. You want him to stay healthy. Cunningham, more limited. You don't want to see Cunningham in coverage. So just catching up here on you. Question about the PK podcast. I am looking into bringing it back. So I had a lot of requests about that. Adam asks, any initial thoughts on how Henry looks? Again, hard to tell. I mean, he looks like Henry. He worked a lot more in those first 4 practices than any of us would have guessed. Then in the first 2 padded practices, he did his early work, but then he wasn't. I don't think I saw him take one team snap, not one team snap where he carried the ball that I can remember, which is more like they approach things to be careful with him and not let anything crazy happen to him. So I don't think that tells us much. I think he needs to prove, probably to himself, though he won't say that, and to them, that he's fine running on that foot, though I'm sure the foot is repaired as well as it could be, and he's going to be fine. To me, the question is that foot the first injury of him now becoming a guy who suffers injuries because of the wear and tear that he's had? The hope would be no. That was somewhat fluky, and that he's got a couple years now before that starts happening on a more regular basis, based on the fact that he's only 27 and that, his first 2 years, he didn't have a lot of wear and tear because he wasn't highly used. I think too much tends to be made of Tannehill not throwing an interception, just like too much was made last year. I think he had 5 in relative short order. Too much tends to be made of anything that's big or small in training camp, unless somebody's really sucking and looks lost. But you remember last year, we were all about Marcus Johnson and Chester Rogers. Well, was that the story of those days, that they were lighting it up? Yes. But did it mean that they were going to be fantastic contributors in the season? Clearly not. And so that should be a lesson. Like, if a low-level wide receiver is lighting it up during training camp, wait until you see him do it for real before you read anything meaning. What's the weakest position group on the team? Well, the depth at wide receiver we've covered pretty well. Could be the offensive line. I'm not a big believer in Dylan Radins. It seems like he's probably going to win that position, though it's really early, and Nicholas Petit-Frere hasn't had his chance yet. I missed Todd Downing yesterday, but indications were the tone of what he said is they're going to decide sooner rather than later about the offensive line spots. And if they decide sooner rather than later, then Radens is going to wind up being the guy because Petit-Frere hasn't had much of a chance. And I like Aaron Brewer. I think he's a class act, a good guy. He's going to work his ass off. But fact of the matter is, when you're a smaller guy like that, working on smarts and working on angles and working on system understanding, and you've got a smaller guy next to you in Ben Jones who's doing the same thing, and you're going against some Jeffrey Simmons-sized guys, ultimately, that's going to beat on you and beat on you and beat on you, and I think you're going to wear down. I think you're going to wear down over time. You know, I asked him about it, and of course he's not going to say, yeah, I expect not to be the same guy on November 1st that I am on September 11th. But I think that's an issue. And then I don't like the depth behind those guys. So I worry about the offensive line. You hope Lewan comes back to a high level. You hope you get the Nate Davis from 2 years ago and not last year. And there's some reason for optimism there because COVID dragged him down last year and he was a little bit banged up, but everybody gets a little bit banged up, right? And Ben Jones, you know, he's getting older. He's going to drop off. You know, he wasn't as good last year as he was the year before, though he grinds and plays through stuff like crazy and he's smart as hell. But I'm concerned about the offensive line. What's my early pick for the starting offensive 11? Well, Henry's in the backfield. Woods and Burks are the wide receivers. And 2 tight ends, I would say Hooper and Chick. They're your 5 eligibles. Offensive line, it just ran through Lewan, Brewer, Jones, Davis, Radens. That's 10, and the quarterback's Tannehill. That was for Will Craig. Chad, I mean, the Phillips highlights are highlights. Most of the plays you see are highlights of a guy and not indicative of what they're doing on every snap. So, but there have been a number of Phillips highlights out of 1-on-1 and 7-on-7. Here's a good one from Shovik. So I tweeted one day, and I'm trying to offer like 1 or 2, maybe 3 like assessments like I did about Haskins, just something I notice that maybe turns into a story, but that's different than the same practice note detail that you're going to get from everybody. I'm really concentrating on being different with my stories and a good share of my tweets. So Haskins is not particularly fast, but he gets up to his speed, it seems to me, by the time he gets the ball with the handoff and by the time he gets to the line of scrimmage, if he's not being hit or harassed, by the time he gets to the line of scrimmage. So I think if you're not a particularly fast running back, that's an awfully nice skill to have, that you at least get to your speed quite quickly. So I like that about him. I don't have a strong feeling about him. I don't like the back end running backs. Cannon and Wilkins do nothing for me. I heard they really like Chestnut coming out. I haven't noticed him at all. Hilliard to me is 3rd down running back, unquestionably. Haskins is the Henry backup and alternate, unquestionably. And beyond that, I don't really care or have a feel, and it would only be an injury situation to me. Torrey Carter is the fullback, and I think Torrey Carter is a fierce, dogged fullback who will be an upgrade from Blasingame, provided he can stay healthy. Robert Is he wrong to be skeptical about three players, Farley, Henry, Woods, to be very productive after three pretty serious injuries? In his opinion, two of those three have to pop for them to have a great year. Well, I have doubts about Farley because I think he's just an injury-prone guy. So even if he's back from the ACL, he had an ACL before in college. He had two back surgeries coming out of college. Then he did the other ACL before which he had a shoulder. Just seems to be banged up a lot and hasn't had a long, consistent time to just play, to just play cornerback. And he converted to cornerback relatively late. So I have worries about Farley in that regard. Woods, it seems to me not a lot, but a reasonable number of wide receivers have ACL setbacks. Though I wonder if he would have had his by now. And he looks damn smooth out there. He's got a real work ethic. Henry, to me, is more about not about the foot, but like I said, are there new injuries? But look, I like a guy that's got some reasonable concerns instead of boundless optimism, Robert. So I see where you're coming from, and I do agree those guys are going to need to be good for this team to have a chance to win. Cornerback, they didn't draft. They didn't draft in the second round McCreary just because they loved McCreary, though they loved McCreary. They certainly thought, well, it's not going to hurt us to have three candidates for outside corner, in addition to Molden as a slot guy, and draft a guy here who could play inside and out in McCreary. Is Racy over Dez at this point? He sure as hell is in my eyes. But that's, 5 when I feel like there's a line after 4. Yeah, Shovek asks about Henry. I think you should have some skepticism about Henry. Wait and see. Trust but verify. Oh, you've got to expect more production out of the tight end, somebody from Facebook is asking. Austin Hooper is a guy who catch a bunch of passes. Last year, they just thought everybody would graduate up a level, which was unreasonable expectation for Ferkser, which I said here and on the site over and over again. It was just unreasonable. And Jeff Swaim's not a good football player. He's not even a great blocker, and they sell him like he's a great blocker. The Titans are not getting Jimmy G. It would further complicate things. And he's a $25 million quarterback now. His price is going to come down. It's still going to be 15. Titans don't have 15 for a quarterback when they've got the highest paid quarterback in the league, highest cap number in the league, and the third round pick invested in quarterback. Sorry, I agree with Adam here. I think it's established, Brian, that the practice squad, it remains 16. I'm not sure about the eligibility rules. I don't know if Tim Kelly is a passing savior, but he should make the offense. He should have an effect on the offense the way that Jim Schwartz had an effect on the defense. Jim Schwartz definitely was a resource at the very least for Shane Bowen. And I would expect minimally the same for Kelly with Downing. The McCreary hype to this point is real. Chance Campbell is like a third team inside linebacker. This is not positive PK. This is the same PK. I'm telling you what's happening. So far, what's happened has been, pretty good. NFL Plus is partially a rebranding of Game Pass plus other things. But that Game Pass element of it won't be any better in terms of functionality, in terms of the scrubbing, in terms of being able to search through a play-by-play if you want to go there like you could in the olden days and look for all of Derrick Henry's carries or all of Derrick Henry's targets. You won't be able to do so. I don't know why they are so reluctant to give it that functionality. I feel a lot better about Treylon Burks than I did in the spring, but he's got to maintain it. I don't see why the defense would make a step back. Personnel-wise, the defense should be as good or better. I think keyed by Bud Dupree being available for a whole season and being himself. Zero faith in Ravens. Monty Rice, we know, had surgery and had an Achilles injury. We don't know if he tore his Achilles or how badly he tore his Achilles. So I have no idea what the timetable is there. That's could have been a pretty serious injury. AJ Brown's a different cat. Ed's asking me to compare my initial impression. I don't remember exactly my initial impression of AJ Brown, but I'm more impressed by AJ Brown because we had not seen a good receiver, a good drafted receiver here in forever. And now the context is different. So Burks doesn't come in as the first good rookie receiver we'd seen in damn 20 or more years. And so that changes the context for Burks. Tim Kelly's around the offense all the time, kind of like Downing is. I don't necessarily agree that the offense is winning over the defense. There have been days, but there have been at least 2 days where the defense had the better of the offense. And I don't put too much stock in it generally. Adam is talking about Radens. I mean, when the bar is being better than Quesenberry, it isn't particularly hard. It's too early to say about if the Titans' passing concepts will be more complex with Kelly in the fold, but I would expect that's certainly part of what he's working on. And passing game coordinator takes something away from Downing. Downing's the play caller, but the passing game concepts, I think Kelly has some ownership of. If they have Treylon Burks returning punts, they are morons. First off, big, long, bulky punt returner is not the way to go. Small and shifty is what you want. They suck at punt returns, though Ackerman trots out there all the time with that big doofy smile on his face and talks like everything's fantastic. If Kyle Phillips can return punts, Kyle Phillips should return punts. Michael, I mean, to me, I never stop hearing the end of damn your favorite receiver. Can't think of his name. I blocked that out of my head. Kinsey. Everybody loves Kinsey. I don't have a good pro comparison for Haskins, Will. I'm not a good comparison guy. If you offer me one up, then I'd go, yeah, I could see that. Shovik, I get what you're saying about Titans stuff on Outkick 360. I mean, we're not that local anymore. So big Titan subjects will get our attention, but granular stuff like I'm doing here will probably not. And so I'm going to try to do more of this. I'm going to try to get back to the podcast. And maybe more frequent versions of the podcast, but I have a few things I need to iron out there. So The O-line, Patrick, is certainly a weaker group because of the starts with not renewing Conklin, not giving Conklin a new deal, which I did not object to at the time. And look, I can see saying, hey, we hit it on Conklin, but he is what he is. He's got some limitations. He's not worth what Cleveland's about to pay him. So we need to go get another Conklin. And then they fuck it up royally with Isaiah Wilson. And the sting of missing that pick to the degree that the guy played 4 snaps as a rookie and disappears from the league lasts. It's got a ripple effect on the roster for the length of time he would have been here. And then you chase it with Radunz, who, I think even if he's quote unquote good, is not going to approach Conklin level. We're setting the bar in this room as to be better than Quez. I think it's a major chase. They are in chase mode at right tackle, and it's ridiculous. And it's all because they couldn't see it. And they've forgiven themselves for it. Oh, we couldn't have seen that coming. The guy turned into a completely different guy. Well, there were, what did they pick him? 26, 25 other teams. No, not every one of them needed an offensive lineman. They didn't touch him. So how come the Titans got so lucky? McCreary could beat Farley out, Paul. It's not unheard of. Wouldn't be a crime against humanity for a second rounder to beat out a first rounder. And then you've got, awfully good depth in your top 4 based on injury. They could change things up based on matchup. If you want the more athletic, longer guy, Farley against certain receivers, and you can take the shorter armed, craftier, smarter guy against some others, I could see a scenario where that's a thing. Adam, I think certainly, having Chig, who's faster, and Hooper, who's craftier, short to intermediate, is a nice combination. They both need to block. Hooper's proven he can. Chig hasn't. I don't know the current cap stuff. I'm not blaming Tannehill for being the highest cap quarterback in the league. You take all the money you can get. I'm blaming Robinson. It's asinine what Robinson did, especially after Julio Jones was a complete bust. Complete bust. I don't want to hear any bullshit about he wasn't a bust. And I was on board with bringing him on. I was on board with bringing Clowney on. But guess what? I'm not a personnel guy who's responsible for knowing if a guy's done or not. Yeah. Clowney, after he went to Cleveland, said, well, it was my knee early, and then it was the scheme. So he's complaining about the scheme. Well, they brought Clowney here because of Vrabel. So how could he have an issue with the scheme? Let's make an excuse after the fact. Julio Jones wasn't busting his ass to be on the field. Julio Jones was looking for reasons to come out. Terrible signing, terrible value. Should have found the money somewhere else. Now you're roped in with Tannehill this year for sure. You had to be. And he's not a playoff guy. He's going to have to win a couple of playoff games to prove he's a playoff guy. You think this team could go to the playoffs and win 4 games with Ryan Tannehill at quarterback without shitting the bed? I don't. What's he done to say that he can't? Going to have to completely change everything he does and everything about him. And I think you could take this team right now, fast forward it to January, and start right then on the Judge Tannehill thing. Punter's competition, Jabari. I wouldn't touch Tannehill's contract right now. They're not saying he's done, but they're saying the verdict is out. Only seen 2 days in pads, Ethan, of Radunz. Guy doesn't have a personality that everybody says I'm putting too much into it. Got a passive personality. Sure, there have been guys with passive personalities who've been good offensive line in the past. I don't trust John Robinson's ability to evaluate draft pick offensive linemen right now. Too early to talk about pass catcher separation as it relates to Kelly, Jim. Ballard and Reich play the game with national media, and Vrabel and Robinson do not. It's pretty simple. It's pretty obvious. Well, they've changed some of the personnel, Ed, that have soft tissue injuries, and they stressed what those guys needed to do while they were away, and maybe they did it. Yeah, Big Jeff screwed up that one-on-one drill, Tyler. He's supposed to turn, go to the cone, turn back. He never went to the cone. So Malik did what he was supposed to do. He come back, and Jeff's just standing there, planted, not in motion. I expect Blake to be back. I have to sort out his sponsorship still. AMP works only on iPhones, and it's still in beta testing. It was really cool, but we didn't have a big enough audience, so I don't know if I'll do it again. I'm going to try a Twitter Spaces, which I think is more accessible to more people. I mean, Fulton was damn good last year. I don't see why he couldn't develop into a Pro Bowl type. Well, Titans don't typically have holdouts, Deezy. But injury-wise, it's been very good. I don't understand why anybody wants Will Fuller, Paul. He's played in 50% of his available games. If you say, well, the Titans should get him and play him in those 8 games, that's how you want to base things? Like, hey, we'll get a guy. Availability is a huge thing for us. We've had problems with availability, but what we're going to do to supplement our wide receiver core is get a guy who plays half the time. If they do that, I'd be shocked. Ryan Tannehill, Patrick, to change his postseason narrative needs to help them win postseason games. I don't think they can win 4 postseason games the way they won in 19 in New England and at Baltimore. It's a quarterback-driven league, and you're certainly going to have to do that in the playoffs. And they had 7 games last year where they threw for under 200 yards. If he's going to do that in the playoffs, there's no chance they're going to win 4 straight games. And I think that's who he is and what they do. I think Baltimore and the Titans play a style of football that is unlikely to go win 4 games in the playoffs when you're facing guys like Burrow and Herbert, who I expect to be there, and Mahomes and Allen and Lamar maybe. And I'm forgetting a couple, I'm sure. AFC is stacked at quarter. Russell Wilson, stacked at quarterback, and the Titans are not. There are no wide receivers out there right now that are going to help this team in any kind of significant way, who are going to be better than NWI. Maybe there's a receiver that's cut by another team at the end of camp who's helpful to them. Maybe. I mean, I wouldn't hesitate to draft Derrick Henry. I'd draft Robert Woods and Treylon Burks as value picks, but not for a while. I would draft Austin Hooper, as my 8th, 9th, 10th, or after tight end. Other than that, I'd stay away, generally speaking. Hey, look what we have here. Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Herndon. A lot of you were saying you were happy that he's here, and he's taken a second to jump in, which means his young boy has been put to bed. How you doing, Mike?
Doing good. Little man's down, so free.
Or do I need to unmute you? Unmuted. No, now you're muted. Try again.
All right, can you hear me now?
I can't hear you. Make sure you're unmuted.
All right, it shows that I'm unmuted on my.
Anybody hearing him? Anybody?
Test.
Edit mic settings. All right, try now.
All right, test.
Damn it.
No.
They can hear you. I can't hear you. Go ahead.
see. I can't hear you now.
All right, that should be it. Is that it?
All right.
All right.
Can you hear me now? I can hear you.
Compliments of your first article. Welcome to the site. I'm thrilled to have you. It was very well received. Let's get to work.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Excited to kind of be back in the Titans content game here. And yeah, I'm really excited about what we're going to be able to do this season with content.
It's going to be good. If you want to throw a couple questions, we'll stay a couple more minutes. So let's see what people got. We've been going at it a long time. I think we've covered a lot of topics, but people might want your opinion on some stuff that we've already covered or out of your thing. Hit quickly what you wrote about today. Why don't the metrics match up with the sack totals in terms of telling us that the Titans front is pretty damn good?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of an interesting topic just because the pass rush win rate kind of stats that ESPN has and several other sites have now. They rank the Titans pass rush within really the bottom 10 pretty frequently in the league. Whereas, obviously the Titans finished tied for 9th in sacks total. They had a really good playoff performance. They had a top 10 to 12-ish pressure rates and things like that. So there was obviously some disconnect there. And I think, kind of what my conclusion came to as I kind of studied some of the numbers and the tape and obviously some familiarity already with the Titans scheme and what they like to do from a pass rush standpoint is I really think it was largely a function of how they like to rush the passer. I mean, they ran, I think it was 10% higher rate of simulated pressures than any other team in the NFL last year, which is a huge jump. Anytime you're a 10% outlier in a stat like that, that's a pretty big flag that's a unique thing to this team. And simulated pressures, as I kind of mentioned in the article, basically when it comes down to it is bringing a rusher from the second level and replacing that rusher in coverage with a defensive end or defensive tackle dropping off the line. And I know it drives people crazy, and I've heard it 1,000 times with Harold Landry. Why do they drop him in coverage? Why do they drop him in coverage? Well, it's basically to keep offenses and offensive lines off guard and to see if they can catch them, with a situation where you've got 3 coming against 2 blockers basically on one side of the formation. And a lot of that, when a rusher is unblocked, they don't count that as a pass rush win. So the Titans, and Harold Landry specifically, leads the entire NFL in unblocked pressures and unblocked sacks since 2019, which, yes, it's quote unquote a cheaper sack compared to like Myles Garrett destroying a tackle and beating him, in 2.5 seconds and getting to the quarterback. But it functionally is what the Titans want to do and what they're successful with, and it fits Harold Landry's skill set. And it's kind of what they built their pass rush around, and we kind of finally saw it all come together last year. And I do think adding Autry was important to that. I do think, even Dupree, when he was right out there, I think he helped with some of that stuff just because he's a physical guy that does command some attention. So I think those factors kind of all came together to make, the Titans functionally were a good pass rush team, but from a metric standpoint, they just don't win the same way that other teams that rank higher in those numbers win.
I think one of the things, and I don't know if this probably doesn't factor into the metric. I think it factors into a lot of people's perception, though, is people like to watch teams that just go, and Washburn's defenses were like that. They just went.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't care if they got some false starts that maybe played on the mind of the offensive linemen. They were rushing. And sometimes they got away with it, maybe, or got closer to the get off. But Vrabel hates few things as much as he hates a player who passes the quarterback. And so that's another thing that kind of contains their rush to a degree. And again, I don't know if it factors into metrics, but if a rusher goes by a quarterback who's stepping up and effectively makes it 10 against 11, he goes insane over that. So that's another thing about the style that they do things with that I think is interesting. We'll hit just like 2 or 3 more here and get out of here. Shobik asks us early thoughts on the youth in the secondary. What are some of the passing down packages he thinks we'll see defensively in the secondary? My one thing about the young corners is, and I'm not saying the Titans are the Bucs from 2 years ago, but we've seen this formula work. The Bucs, when they won the Super Bowl, won that game with a veteran pass rush and young corners, some rookies and some second-year guys who nobody really knew. And they played more than effectively well enough for that recipe to work. If you've got a good enough rush up front and athletic enough corners, and I imagine I'm not remembering the safeties, but I imagine they had some veteran leadership there. Titans are very similar formulaically here. And there are some other teams in the league approaching it the same way, who I think believe young, gifted corners who may not have a ton of experience can be part of a winning formula if you have the right pieces in place elsewhere.
Yeah, I would agree with that because I do feel like corner on defense is a little bit like running back on offense. It's a young man's game. Athleticism is at an absolute premium, and you're never going to have that more so than you do when you're 23, 24 years old. So I do think there's something to be said for that. But at the end of the day, Caleb Farley is such a huge question mark. Still, we really haven't seen him play to this point. And we'll see what McCreary is. Obviously, early returns seem to be pretty positive on him so far. But I do like the mix. I think they've got a lot of potential, but there is some risk there just because of the youth. And you may have some early season busts with that kind of growing pains that you're likely to see. And as far as personnel packages, I think, the interesting thing with inside linebackers is in years past, they kind of had Jayon Brown and David Long, who you could put together on the field on passing downs that were both at least credible coverage linebackers. They don't really have that now. I don't think that's not Monty Rice's strong suit, even as a third linebacker. It's not, you don't want Dylan Cole on the field. And Zach Cunningham is atrocious as a pass coverage linebacker, which is fine. He makes up for it by being arguably the best run defending inside linebacker in the NFL, but you don't want him on the field in passing down. So I think you're going to see a lot of dime with David Long as the sole off-ball linebacker, and then 6 defensive backs on the field in third and medium to long type situations. So it'll be interesting to see whether that 6 defensive back is a corner, like, do they go McCreary, Molden, Fulton Farley, or do they throw Theo Jackson or AJ Moore into the mix as a third safety? They've mostly gone with 3 safeties in that dime package in years past, but I think the personnel probably points more to your corners are probably your better players on the roster right now.
And I'm very curious to see what they do against the better tight ends that they see, because while Cruikshank didn't deliver for a long time last year when he got healthy, he did a pretty damn good job on some of those guys. And I don't know that they have somebody who's a comp right now. Could be more matching up game by game, depending on body types and all of that. So that's something we'll definitely keep an eye on. We'll leave you with a joking one. Will Craig, one of my old 22, asks, over under on how many times I ask you to stop writing like a fan.
I'm going to try to keep that under 1/2. I'm going to try to keep away from doing that. We'll see what happens.
We obviously had a conversation about this when we were discussing him coming aboard, and he's welcome to root as he does. But what I asked him to do was come write the clever analytical pieces about things that we don't think about, which is what he started off with yesterday, and which is what I'm sure he'll deliver next Wednesday and for weeks coming forward. So I doubt it crosses into his content, and it'll be on his Twitter feed, and that's just fine. So we know that he and I come at this from vastly different places, which is part of what makes it a great ad. I'm really happy to have you, Mike. I appreciate everybody coming in. It was a great crowd tonight. And we'll do it again soon. And Mike, you'll have to join me at least one more time for a public one where we could do a sales pitch and get ourselves some new subscribers.
Absolutely.
All right, everybody, don't block the box. Do lock the locks. Outkick 360 tomorrow, 2 to 5 Central. Thanks. Appreciate your loyalty and support and your enthusiasm over Mike joining us. Have a good night, everybody. Be well.